أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum everybody, and first and foremost Eid al-Zahra Mubarak to all of you, and we hope that inshallah these days of Azah were very fulfilling for all of you, and inshallah Imam Hussein alayhi salam and Sayyidah Fatima salamullah alayha accept your Azah inshallah. This is episode 3 of the Poets of the Household podcast, where we discuss and explore different aspects of poetry in relation to our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his holy household alayhi salam. And always, I'm joined with my co-host, Brother Naqi Rizvi. Naqi, how you doing, bro?
I'm doing great. I am joining in from Montreal today, and I'm excited to talk to our special guest today.
On the road. All right, thank you. We'll keep it English, not French, since he's in Montreal. Don't worry about it, guys. I don't want Naqi to show off his French skills, so don't worry about that. And as Naqi alluded to, we do have a very special guest. Today is a very, very good episode. You've joined with us today. It's a really good episode, alhamdulillah. We have the honor and the privilege to be joined by Sister Batool Rizvi. Most of you know her on Instagram as at Batool in Pursuit. Sorry about that. By the way, I am battling a cold, so if my voice does get a little hoarse or strange, I apologize for that. But again, we are joined by Sister Batool Rizvi at Batool in Pursuit on Instagram. For those who don't know who Sister Batool Rizvi is, you're probably living under a rock. But Batool Rizvi is a poet, content writer, educator, and artist who graduated with a Bachelor of Science from Rutgers University and with a postgraduate certification from UCLA in creative writing. Her first short story, which is titled Conference of the Forest, is part of the Crimson Earth anthology and was published in 2023 for the Farthest Lote Tree. Currently, she serves on the board for Imamiya Medics International, IMI, and the Shia Professional Association for Creativity and Education, also known as SPACE. During her free time, Batool likes to collaborate with other creatives to host and organize workshops, open mics, and conferences. Sister Batool, assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for being with us here today.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for that kind introduction,
No
which I
problem.
don't think I deserve.
No problem at all.
Batool, you being such a decorated poet, mashallah, I want to know, and I'm curious about those humble beginnings, what got you inspired into getting into poetry and starting off to write poetry in the English language, if that was the first language you wrote in poetry in, and what your journey has been so far to get you to where you are today.
Yeah, no. So I would say that like all throughout like my education, I guess, or like throughout like high school, middle school, I would say even elementary school, I've always like my favorite subject in school would be like English. And I always needed to express myself creatively. So like before I was a poet, I was like a painter and an artist. And I still, if I have time, I still like to express myself in that way.
Nice.
But I guess when it came specifically to poetry, since a young age, I would say that I was surrounded by Urdu poetry when it came to like especially the months of Muharram, but also like the months of like Rajab and even like any of like the viladats of our Imam, whether that was like mankabats, knots, or also obviously like Nohe, Marsiya, Salam, Soz, right, in
Right.
Muharram.
Right.
So a lot of that was my first exposure to poetry. And then when it came to writing English poetry, it wasn't really until 2017 when I decided to like start publicly publishing and like creating an account. I think that was in 2018. And Yeah, it was really from like the support of like my family and my friends that really allowed me and like gave me, you know, like the confidence to share and to recite publicly. Um and and yeah, so that's essentially it.
MashaAllah, it's like we've heard this story before, eh, Naqi? Kind of
Yeah.
matches our style. Yeah, for sure. Um, so you've talked about your poetic journey, and mashallah, it kind of resonates kind of where we're coming from. And I wanted to ask you, now that the days of Azar are over, the 2 months and 8 days that we formally commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we drive a lot of inspiration from Karbala and Muharram in regards to our pieces, and kind of I don't know if you have this experience or not, but when these days of Azar are over, yes, Milad al-Nabi is coming up as well. We write for the Prophet, but then we kind of go into this lull, a little bit of an inspiration lull, as we say. So I kind of wanted to kind of pick your brain as to how you keep yourself motivated during this stretch. Because it looks like we said, during Karbala, during Muharram, the pen is always flowing, thoughts are always coming. But again, during that inspiration lull, it kind of dies down. So do you have any kind of methods or any sort of advice you can give to other reciters or other writers as to how you keep yourself motivated during that period?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying especially is like hitting home and like hitting to my heart right now. Because like the last day of, or like the ninth day was like a few days ago, right? Of Rabiul Awwal. And I feel like honestly, right now, like sometimes you just like need to sit in those emotions of feeling sad and depressed that the months of mourning are over. I always feel like either there is I have such a conflicting, like
Mm-hmm.
my heart and my mind are so in conflict with each other because it's just like we've been wearing black for so long, and then it's such a norm that you just get used to.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I feel like something that I've been seeing on social media, but also like what a sheikh was actually saying this weekend too, was that, like, yes, the month of like mourning can are over, but remembering Imam Hussein is never over. Like you're constantly doing that.
Yes.
Or should constantly try to strive to do that.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, like I feel like, like I'm really just sitting in those emotions right now of just
Mm-hmm.
feeling sad. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's okay, like um you're I feel like constantly like in Muharram, like if you have the privilege, of constantly being surrounded by like community and events and like mourning and like just different things that are going on, and then suddenly it's sort of just like still and silent.
Yeah.
um that can be sad, but then also I think that can be really great to give you the time to write. Yes, like a lot of like your inspiration, like the majlises, the nohe, like the poetry and stuff that you're constantly surrounded by, and the inspiration that you're constantly surrounded by may be like taken away from you, but that doesn't mean that you can't still find those sources of inspiration. So like what I hopefully plan on doing, is to like keep reading, listen to the lectures that I didn't get a chance to listen to during Muharram,
Mm-hmm.
um, and hopefully like, like talk to like other creatives and like collaborate with other creatives, and like pour myself into like my community or like the Shia artistic community in
Yeah.
other ways.
Yeah.
Um, because like you still can, just because these 2.5 months are over doesn't mean that those inspirations or those sources that you can go to are gone, because
Right.
alhamdulillah, we live in like the age of social media and
Mm-hmm.
technology and the internet, and information is like at the click of your fingertips. So it's a blessing in that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point that it's never gone. It's always there because that's the key point. Like, yes, the days of us are over, but we're not saying farewell to Imam Hussein. There's
Yeah.
no way that can happen, right? Like you can't say
One,
farewell to someone you love. Yes, there's a season of mourning. 2 months and 8 days have its own specialty, and that's what we bid farewell to. That's why, like you said, ninth Rabiul Awwal, it's so conflicting because you go from black to wearing red. Like when I wear this color, it's like, oh yeah, I can wear it now. Yeah, it's okay, I can wear it. Even like just a personal story, like on the ninth Rabiul Awwal, like my son came up to me once and like he would just come up to me and just he's only like he's a baby, he's like a year, and he would just come up to me and just start, beating his chest, meaning put no on for me on ninth Rabiul Awwal. I'm like, not today, tomorrow, kind of thing like that, because it is a day of happiness, and that's the beauty of our religion, is that we're happy when they're happy, we're sad when they're sad. Yes, we have to put away our personal feelings, and the ninth Rabiul Awwal is a happy day. So yeah, we grieve for 2 months and 8 days consistently, and to kind of directly transfer it to a happy day becomes really tough. So I mean, we completely understand where you're coming
one
from
thing,
now. Yeah.
one thing I found interesting that Batul said, and it resonated with me, was allowing for time.
Mm.
Like I'm sure you guys feel the same way, and probably many people, especially as Shia poets, whenever there's like a wiladat or shahadat coming in, we kind of almost feel like forced to like, I
Yeah.
need to write for this like shahadat that's coming up, and like, and sometimes like, I mean, oftentimes I would say, especially you guys' poetry, like it comes out really good, right? Even though we have to sometimes force ourselves to write, but I think this kind of time where it's like slow period, or not that pressure period where I only got 2 days until this shahadat and then 2 days there's another shahadat, I think it allows us to like really spend time and think, and like maybe revise our poetry a lot and like work through it, right? Maybe an idea that we have. One thing I did this Muharram that I think is really going to be good for the rest of the year is, whenever I used to have an idea, I would just like, I had this like list of just poem ideas, and I just like jot them down, right? So I didn't get to write out all the Muharram poetry that I wanted to write this Muharram because of time constraints and things like that. But I think if I slowly pace myself through the year, I could probably go back and do that. And I think we could always write Muharram poetry even when it's on Muharram, or even any other type of poetry at all, right?
Yeah, it's a great point, because this is a good time to reflect and kind of take it easy and kind of sit back and read. Like there's a lot of books that I have that I haven't read yet because of how busy the 2 months and 8 days get. And this is a great opportunity to kind of sit back, read, gather your thoughts, and get that inspiration from there. So those are great points that both of you brought up. Now, kind of shifting the discussion to more of a an educational one, about a more on a literature side, is you being of a Pakistani background, like you said, you listened all your life to Urdu poetry, and when we talk about kind of the giants of Urdu poetry, we talk about Iqbal, Ghalib, Anis, Dabir, right? So do you think that the poets of the Urdu literature, like those poets, can be used as a catalyst for English poetry as well? Or can we only derive inspiration and foundation in the way we write from poets of a European background? I know it might be a fully loaded question, but you're the perfect person to ask this question.
So no, I think that even though we are writing in English,
Mm,
um, there is so much beauty and so much weight in the poets of the Eastern languages. And I think that we should find inspiration from um anybody who's great, you know,
yeah, yeah,
regardless of what background they come in, but
right.
especially like especially the Urdu subcontinent, poets. And I think that we should find inspiration from any poet who is doing incredible work, and any poet who was great or who was a legend.
Mhm.
Um because regardless of where they come from, regardless of what the language that they spoke, um if there's something useful or something creative or something novel, that they did,
Mhm.
um, and we can figure out a way to somehow um derive like inspiration from them, then I don't think that we should set limitations on ourselves.
Right.
Whether they're like Urdu poets or whether they were Arab, like Arabic, uh, had like roots in like the Arab
Yeah.
culture or Persian culture,
Right.
um wherever we can find the inspiration, I think. And if we do it in a way that's honoring them and honoring their work and their legacies, and not in a way where it feels forced but is organic, I think the most important thing is doing it in a way that is respectful and honoring them, because I think there is like a fine line, right, of like what would it mean, for instance, to colonize other people's work. We wouldn't want to, like, I wouldn't want to be doing that, like whiteifying maybe
Right.
like a certain, or colonizing, like a certain type of like maybe structure or practice um that was like there.
You mentioned, Batul, you mentioned something around the lines of like poetic lineages, right, and ancestry a lot, and that's really interesting that you word it like that. I want to find out, like, do you, when you are writing, right, do you feel that poetic lineage in yourself, or that poetic ancestry, and like you're kind of translating in? I know we're talking about poets right now, and like in getting inspiration from their poetry, but I think all these poets belong to some sort of like family of poetry, or style of poetry, or thoughts or philosophy of poetry, right? When you write, do you find yourself a part of that, or an inheritor of that lineage, um, or are you kind of feeling like, okay, whatever I'm creating it's myself, it's my own, I guess, like, aside from whatever my background is, or aside from whatever my heritage is, I'm doing something brand new.
Hmm. Yeah. That's a really great question. I think it depends. If I think it depends on each poem, like what my intention is with that specific piece. If I had just maybe read, like, for instance, like a ghazal by Agha Shahid Ali, right? Um, who wrote like a lot of like amazing ghazals, for instance. Um, and I want to maybe like imitate a certain style or like a certain thing that he did, or like certain syllable counts, for instance, that he had in his couplets. Then I know that, like, I am doing this, and like his poems were like a guide, or like are teaching me, and are challenging me to see if I can sort of take on his sort of style, or if I want to write more of like a spiritual type of like ghazal and stuff, after reading like maybe certain lines of like Rumi's Masnavi, then I know that like I'm learning from his work
Right.
and seeing if I can do it like in the English language on a certain topic of maybe my choosing. So I think that it depends, like like combining the intention of what I want to do and seeing if I can be creative, and maybe stretch a little bit of like the limits, go a little bit beyond, and see if there's like a way to like merge and like marry that intention in mind and what I have just read or learned.
So
Um,
basically, what I want to understand is what you're saying is that depending on the topic and depending on your intention, based on that, you would choose the appropriate poetic to use for that piece. So like, you don't want to kind of bound yourself to just one certain style. Like if you want to use, the ghazal style, like we talk about matla, qafiya, radif, that for this piece, you're okay with that. And if this topic kind of is more appropriate for a free verse or spoken word, then you're right towards that. Is that kind of what you're alluding to when you're
yeah,
mentioning the different kind
yeah,
of poetic styles?
yeah, and I think also it. it's heavily influenced by like what I'm currently reading or who I'm currently reading at the time. Like there is like a time when I was reading a lot of Rumi, so I was writing a lot of like couplets and like spiritual poems and stuff. There was a time when I was reading a lot of Ghalib. So I was trying to figure out a way to incorporate like Urdu into English, just like experimenting. And I think that's like the most important thing as a poet. And especially starting off too, is to experiment and to not lock yourself anywhere, right? Like just back to that like previous question that we had talked about is like finding that inspiration from anywhere and everywhere and whatever resonates with you, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I think one of the beauties of the English language is that it's able to take from so many different, or the cultures and canons of so many different cultures. So even if you look at Old English poetry, I think there was a very strong focus on alliteration, and the rhyme was actually not that much of a focus. And then when you start coming into like Middle English, because of that influence from the Normans and a little bit of the Italian, you see Chaucer's poetry starts to introduce the end rhymes. And then even in modern poetry, you know, we see haikus and we see all these different, from all these different cultures, the influence that English poetry receives from these different cultures. And I think now with what you're mentioning, Batool, we're also seeing with poets like Agha Shahid Ali and others as well, the introduction of Eastern styles, like the ghazal, for example, or other types of Eastern poetry into the West. Or English poetry. The one drawback, though, that I wanna get your thoughts on as well, is at certain times, it's hard to translate like the Eastern mind or the Eastern culture that we have or values that we have into the English canvas, right? For example, like if I want to write about Haya, right, or if I want to write about Bepardagi of Bibi Zainab, for example, right, I sometimes can't think of words like modesty, but it's not the same thing, right? Like you can't really use modesty to describe like the tragedy of Bibi Zainab, for instance. Whereas if you just say bihaya in like, or bihayai in Urdu, for example, or in another language, you know, you immediately are able to get that meaning. Are we able to marry these things, or is it that we need to now start to create a new culture of poetry that kind of takes a little bit of that which can be applied, and not everything probably can be applied? Like I want to get both of you guys' thoughts on this. I don't know if did it make sense what I just said? I kind of just blurted out.
No, it makes sense. It completely makes sense. Please, Abbas, bye.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've talked about this where, you know, in Urdu they have, and we talked about it in our first episode, I think, Naqi, where they have something called Nasri Nazm, right? And that style was brought from the West to the East, and that's more of a free verse, spoken word type of poetry. Whereas Urdu poetry, and I believe Iranian Farsi poetry as well, it's more based on structure and rhyme and meter and weight, qafiya, radif, all that. So, and they also have something called Azad Nazm, but Azad Nazm is also within meter as well. So Nasreen Nazm is more free verse. And I was like, when I found out that that was brought from the West to the East, that took me back a little bit. You know what I mean? Because, you know, we've always heard the opposite. You know, especially us growing up in the culture that we grew up, we take what we learned from Eastern ideologies and transfer that to the Western. But this was kind of backwards. And that was really refreshing to see, because as you guys, you know, when you would go on this English journey, we kind of had to have this conflict inside of us. You know, we grew up as a Urdu family. If you want to write, you should write Urdu. And English is kind of, you know, living here in the West. It's like, you know, is it accepted or not? And alhamdulillah, I think we've kind of gone past that, and it's more accepted. The speeches in English, Masaib in English, now poetry in English has now been accepted. So when you see something from the West inspiring something for the East, that's really motivating for us. So yeah, I think that's very much so possible. That's just my 1.5 cents, not even 2 cents. It's my 1.5 cents. I'm gonna leave the rest to you, Batool, to kind of answer that question.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. But and I actually want to research that after what you said. But um yeah, I think there needs to still be like if I'm going to be completely honest, there needs to be a lot more work in the
Mm-hmm.
English language.
Mm-hmm.
Even for instance when it comes to like Masai,
Mm-hmm.
and like even you know, like back in the day, like during like the Imam's times, for instance, a lot of the Masai used to be in poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like figuring out a way to do that in English where it's actually where it has depth, and it conveys the same amount of depth
Mm-hmm.
as Urdu, Arabic,
Mm-hmm.
Farsi,
Mm-hmm.
Masaib, and the language does.
Mm-hmm.
um I think there is work that's being done, but I think like, you know, I think it would be really cool to see if like for instance like poets like us and other amazing poets, you know, that are out there in the English language um write Messiah for maybe like lectures or whoever in the English language, because we have those skills and the toolbox of like things like metaphor, imagery, similes, alliteration, um all of these literary devices in the English language
Yeah.
that conveys the depth, right?
Yeah.
That can transport like the audience or you know the azadars just as much as if they were sitting in Urdu Masab. Um, but yeah, I would also say even like with the English, like English poetry too, like there needs to be work constantly,
Yeah.
myself included. Um, But
One of
I
the things that,
think that
yeah,
it
go
is
ahead.
possible. I think it is possible to reach that level.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say that is because um I've sitting under English poets who've recited English poetry for the Ilbit, and they've
Mm-hmm.
moved the entire audience to a lot of tears, like rikkat,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like
Mm-hmm.
rikkat that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I also recite English majlis like for ladies and stuff. And it's something that I like to put a lot of emphasis on for like the Messiah in English. Um, and alhamdulillah, se, um, I feel like I'm working towards that, and it's been receptive, like it's been well received. Um, but yeah, like I think that what you were mentioning, Nakiba, like the latter option of like using some of those influences, but I think it is time for us like to develop a formidable way for the English language to be like, you know, like we are here, like the English language is here and it is strong. It is just as strong.
Right.
Um, and what that might look like, I don't know, you know, like I mean, I think like everything that I did just said, like those literary devices and using the inspiration, and figuring out like, you know, what that might look like for the future. I don't know. Like I think it's just like a
Yeah.
matter of just
Yeah.
seeing how English poets maybe just like develop over time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so
Yeah, no, it's a great point because we've talked about this so much, and I don't think we could talk about it enough. Is that our forefathers, they came from Medina, I mean, at least mine, to Iran, to India, to here, and when they migrated to every country, they adapted to that language of the country. So when my forefathers transferred from Iran to India, if they were steadfast on Farsi and they wanted to do everything in Farsi and not bring it to Urdu, we would not have these gifts and these treasures that we have today in Urdu if they were so staunch on their language. Similarly, here we've migrated here now, and that doesn't mean that we're trying to replace the language. We're trying to add to it. Like that's the key thing. I think a lot of individuals and elders, they might be feared that we're trying to replace a language. We're not trying to replace, we're introducing a new language because it's a void. There are people who don't understand Urdu and they only understand English. So why not fill that void? And to your point about English bringing a lot of tears and crying and emotions inside of a person, like there's no language that's deeper right now than Arabic. Arabic is the language of God. And if languages like Farsi and Urdu can drive that emotion, which Arabic, even though is a richer language than those, then why can't English do that as well? Like I can put an English kalam next to an Urdu kalam. And doesn't mean that because it's in Urdu, it wins every time when it comes to emotion. No. English has its own beauty, has its own depth. Like you said, we have those literary devices, which honestly, it's not even been a drop in the bucket yet. At least here, I would say that we're still working towards, mashallah, I would put Zain Awan, Nuri, Tahira, Adil, mashallah, the work that all of you have put in, mashallah, Allah reward you for that. And this is just the beginning in regards to what we want to do.
I think one
Speaking of
other
that,
point I want to make.
yeah, Naqi, go ahead.
Yeah.
I want to ask you had a question before I move on to the next topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to like one thing I want to I guess extend on the topic that you guys have talked about as well is like India, sorry, not India. Urdu is a good use case, I mean a case study. And I think we should look at the way poetry was developed for the ahlulbayt in the Urdu language. And I think a lot of those lessons could be learned in English because when when the morning or Azadari of Imam Hussein came into India or into that region, and they were trying to reimagine how to present this poetry in Urdu. We talked about this with our poet friend Salman Haider, who mentioned like there wasn't that many historical resources available during that time, right? It wasn't very widely available to have books on history about the Maqtals of Imam Hussein during that time in India when Mir Anis or Mir Dabir were writing them Marasi. But one thing I think that was special about Mir Anis, Mir Dabir is that they actually reimagined the entire event of Karbala from the lens of a Hindustani person, right? A person living in Hindustan. So even if you look at the marsias that they write, or even the nohas in today, a lot of those are focused on values that are highly regarded in the Indian subcontinent, like familiar relationships, chacha, bhatiji, and these bhai, ben, like a lot of those elements, you won't actually find that in Arabic or Farsi poetry, but they really made this entire event or the fadail and the masaib of Ahlul Bayt feel like it happened in India in a way, right? And that's how it sometimes feels when you're listening to it or reading this poetry. I think when we're thinking about reimagining these events in the Fazail and Masaib of Ahlul Bayt in the English language, I think that's an exercise we're going to have to do is kind of letting go of that, a little bit of the lineage that we've been carrying along and reimagine this in a Western context, right? What would make someone living in the West who doesn't have any of this Eastern context or lineage still connect and feel deeply emotional with this message, right? And I think it requires a think tank. And I think I would love for us to initiate something like this where we start thinking about like keywords. For example, if you say Jawan in any Urdu poem or Salam or Noha, you know exactly who we're referring to, right? If you say Chadar, you know exactly who we're referring to.
Right.
Those connotations that exist within some of these words, they don't currently exist in English. And I think we need that think tank to everyone start using the same vocabulary for certain things. That way it's in common verbiage and people can make that connection on their own instead of us having to explain it every single time. Like we still haven't agreed upon what mushk is translated into. Is it water skin? Is it carrier? Is it container? Or is it water bag? Like let's stick to one so that it creates this common language in the ears of the listeners or readers, even in Masaib, right? Both poetry and Masaib.
Yeah, I think a lot of work to do there for sure. And I think that kind of is a great segue to our next topic here is that's what we're trying to do here at the Poets of the Household, right? We're trying to build a community. We're trying to make that work when it comes to English poetry, trying to get that out there, trying to make sure that, people understand, hey, English poetry is still a thing. We could do the praise of Prophet Muhammad Rasulullah and his holy household alayhi salam through English, and it's possible. And in regards to that, we're specifically trying to build a community, right? And alhamdulillah, we've done that. We've done writing prompts. We've invited guests like yourself, Batool, to our podcast. We're trying to create engaging videos by explaining what a haiku is, things like that, baby steps. And so in regards to that, alhamdulillah, the responses have been great. We've had 2 writing prompts, and alhamdulillah, the feedback and the responses have been great. So it looks like things are progressing in the right way in regards to building a community. Now, when it comes to community, Batool, mashallah, you have a lot of experience in that field. So can you speak on your experience of finding and creating community in poetic spaces, and kind of how we can do that when it comes to English poetry in praise of the ahlulbayt?
Yeah, no, I think that the work that you guys are doing is, wonderful, mashallah. And may you guys like continue doing the work, because it's needed, like this space and this platform. I also just wanted to say one last thing about the previous topic before I go into this.
Yeah,
But I
please,
think
please.
I think it will be actually like a good sort of
Segue transition type.
combination, I guess, of the two. But
Yeah.
like I will say that yes, like it is important to have like English voices in Urdu or traditional like Urdu, Arabic, Farsi spaces. But I also think just as important as that is, it is just as important to also see those really like the legends or the canonical poets of like the Eastern Muslim hemisphere in Western academic spaces as well. I think that there is unfortunately still like a great lack of visibility of like poets like Iqbal, Ghalib, Rumi in those traditional classroom settings, as well as even like in higher education. A lot of published poets, professors, right? Like they don't have that part of their curriculum, unfortunately. And I think that that's also like a community, right, of poets. Like it's interesting. Like I feel like I have like 2 communities, like 2 separate communities. Like there's like my Muslim or like my Shia poetic community, and then there's like the non-Muslim poetic community, which like usually like comes from like workshops or like from school and stuff like that, right? So like it's important that that representation, I guess, is there on both ends. But yeah, I would say that like alhamdulillah, like I've I think the community is like a really important thing, despite like which field you're in. And I think that like when I like first started out like sharing and like yeah, just like like writing poetry, I've always just wanted to have and like have always like sought out poetic Shia poetic communities, because I honestly, like when I was starting off, I didn't really see as many, other than like, finally I like came across like Brother Nuri, Brother Tahir, Brother Zan, a sister Abir, Safa. But I think it's just like important to connect with poets. And then I sort of started doing like virtual open mics. I think like the pandemic really helped like I guess like jumpstart trying to like find and like forced everyone to be virtual too, which was sort of like a blessing in disguise, because so many of us like aren't in like the same area, or living like across like borders and ponds and stuff like that. So
it's like this, we get to invite you to our podcast, even though we live in kind of Canada, Toronto, you're somewhere else, so we're able to connect this way. So yeah, it's a blessing for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And then just hosting like virtual open mics, and then attending conferences that were like led by the youth for the youth. and like figuring out a way to like really be involved in those spaces um really helped me out, I would say, in terms of just like visibility, building community, um and yeah. I've been like talking and rambling for
No,
a
it's
while,
great.
so yeah, I'll jump in.
No, no, it's great. It's great because this is something that, a lot of people have this question on their mind. It's like, kind of, how do I get out there? How do I get my name out there? Um, so in regards to that, are you saying that, uh, first of all, I think Instagram is a great medium for that. I think, getting your pieces out there, tagging people. I know I get annoying when it comes to tagging. I tag a lot of people in my pieces. That's because it's just, you want to share, and you want to make sure that your hard work is recognized, and that people, like-minded people, understand that. But outside of Instagram, like, now that we've kind of gone outside of the virtual, now we're kind of post-pandemic and things have opened up. Like, where would you say to kind of, be part of a community? Like, any advice or anything that you would kind of focus on? So, you know what, do this, and inshallah, Allah will help you along the way.
Now, like, if things are happening more like in person, like there's conferences, there's always like open mics, hopefully. Like, I guess like I live like, like near New York and stuff, so there's always open mics happening in like the
Yeah,
city. um
yeah,
but even if there's not open mics happening, like, who says that you can't, like, and you, the general you, can't start an open mic, like get
right.
like a few of your friends, figure out like some theme or some topic
Hmm.
that can be universal across like different mediums. Like, it doesn't just have to be poetry, it can be comedy, um it can be singing, it can be like other things, right? um like that. But I would say like there are like a lot of stuff, like, I would say, happening like in, mashallah, say, like in America by like young people,
Yeah.
when it comes to like conferences or like even third party spaces.
Hmm.
And obviously that's not like the Imam Barga, right? But like maybe in like a university setting or like some other like organization.
Hmm.
So for instance, like I'll just shout out like a few organizations here that people can maybe like get involved with.
Please
Um,
do.
so I would say Ahlulbayt Collective, or ABC. That's a collective that's based out of California, but like they accept like submissions and stuff from everywhere. They also host like open mics, do a lot of great stuff.
Hmm.
I'm also part of Space, as you mentioned. So that's the Shia Professional Association for Creativity and Education.
Hmm.
We had like our first conference last year. Our second conference is happening this year in Vancouver, inshallah.
Mashallah.
If anybody wants to come, Veterans Day weekend. Um,
Mashallah.
and then there's also Marifa programs, which has been around as well. And then there's also a lot of TMAs and ABSAs and ABSOCs and stuff like that. Um, for like young, people, like college students, to get involved in their community, like pitch ideas of like having creative events, open mics, galleries, stuff like that. Um, and I think, like, hopefully, you'll be able to like find a community. Um, and it
Any
can be
communities for
challenging.
older people like me and Abbas bhai? It sounds like everything is for the college folks
Poets of the
and
household.
Shout out.
Yeah, no, no, and then I feel like if you get like, I think it depends, like that is a challenge, like that demographic. Um, and I think like Instagram, like you said, like it's like a good place to like initially like seek out other
Hmm.
creatives and writers.
Hmm.
And then like see like, would they be down to go on like virtual like workshops,
Yeah.
or to have virtual workshops, or if you're in the same area, to do it in person. And then maybe like ask like the Imam Bargas or the masjids near you, like, hey, like, there's a group of us, we're really into this, like, can we like do this maybe like at a larger scale, or like with your support.
Hmm.
um but yeah, like it's scary sometimes, and like,
Yeah.
I'm not
Mike,
yeah.
stage
gonna
fright. Stage fright. A lot of stage fright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Batool. That was great information. So anybody listening out there, Batool, I don't think you would mind if anybody reached out to you personally to ask you for more information. Reach out to Batool. If you are interested in any mic night, any open mics, presenting your pieces, if there's anything going on in your area, Batool is the person to go to. So please contact her.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of presenting poetry, we always like to end our podcast episodes with a poem by the special guest. So would you like to do us the honors by reciting one of your pieces?
Yeah, sure. Inshallah.
Mashallah.
I will recite a poem that was requested. And I think it's fitting. I think it is fitting based on like everything that we've talked about. I did share this obviously on my Instagram, but it's a poetic response to Agha Shahid Ali's poem, which was titled Zainab Lament in Damascus.
Mm-hmm.
And I know obviously that we have just ended like Ayam Aza, but inshallah this was written as like a farewell to that, and it's titled A Mourner's Face in the Farewell Lament.
Bismillah.
Over Hussein's months, what light has swollen in infinite sorrow. Look at me, O Muslims of the Ummah, a mourner's mourner, a daughter's daughter. Over my master's bleeding mansion, dawn rose at such permanent cost. So I weep now, and I wept yesterday. Damascus was deaf. I hope I am not. Right now, I hear you. Right now, I hold the pain in my hands, tangible. Like he, the severed heart, the very heart of Muhammad. O Clay's father, son, forgive me, forgive my absence. I am here now, burying your unburied with tears. Hussein's sister, hear my chest. Over my master's months, what light has swollen, an infinite heaving, an endless melancholy. Hussein's sister, you alone were left to tell your brother's story. I alone cry at night. I find you here. I will find you in between flags of chadars, in between agrabati and rosewater. I will find your brother because you found me first. Zainab, how did you say farewell? I cannot let go this panic. Let there be no farewell.
Subhanallah.
MashaAllah.
Beautiful
Subhanallah.
poem.
What a great piece to end off this discussion. And these days of Aza, I couldn't think of a more fitting way, mashallah. So this ends and concludes another episode of the Poets of the Household podcast. Sister Batool Rizvi, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, inshallah.
Jazakallah, Jazakallah. With that said, thank you for all of our listeners and viewers for being with us today. On behalf of Naqi and myself, until next time, inshallah, wassalamu alaikum.